In the middle of a deadly blizzard, the millionaire cowboy stepped outside to check his mailbox, fighting the freezing wind that cut through the silence of his lonely ranch. Snow covered everything, and the night felt endless, until something unnatural caught his eye near the fence. At first, he thought it was debris buried in snow, but as he moved closer, his heart began to pound. Lying there was a young woman, half conscious, her body shaking, her breath weak, her eyes filled with fear and surrender. She was abandoned, left behind like she meant nothing, moments away from death. The cowboy had seen harsh winters and cruel people, but this sight froze his blood more than the storm itself. He did not know who she was or why she was there, but he knew one thing clearly. If he walked away, she would not survive the night. In that moment, his quiet life was about to change forever. The story begins with a wealthy cowboy living alone on a remote ranch where the land stretched endlessly and human voices were rare. He had earned his fortune through hard work, patience, and years of sacrifice, yet his large house remained empty and cold. Money brought him comfort, but never companionship, and respect from others could not replace the warmth of family. Every winter, the snow covered his ranch like a heavy blanket, trapping him in silence for weeks. Nights were the hardest, filled only with the sound of wind striking the walls and memories he tried to forget. He had chosen this life to escape pain, but loneliness followed him anyway. People believed he had everything, yet no one saw the emptiness behind his calm eyes. On that frozen land, the millionaire cowboy lived without expecting change, unaware that fate was already moving toward his door. As the night grew darker and the cold tightened its grip around the ranch, the wind suddenly rose with violent force, pushing snow across the land like waves in a frozen ocean, and the cowboy sensed something was wrong beyond the usual cruelty of winter. He pulled on his coat and stepped outside, his boots sinking deep as the storm swallowed all familiar sounds, turning the world into a white blur. Each step felt heavier, not only from the snow, but from an unexplainable unease settling in his chest, as if the silence itself was warning him. While moving toward the edge of his property, his eyes caught a faint, unnatural movement near the mailbox, something that did not belong in a place where even animals hid from the storm. At first, he dismissed it as wind playing tricks on his tired mind, but the shape remained still, almost fragile against the endless white. His heart began to race as he pushed forward, the freezing air burning his lungs, until the shape slowly became human. Lying in the snow was a young woman, her body curled weakly, her clothes soaked and stiff with ice, her face pale under layers of frost. She was barely conscious, her breath shallow, each exhale weaker than the last, as if the storm was stealing life from her 1 second at a time. For a moment, the cowboy stood frozen, shocked by the cruelty of what he was seeing, unable to understand how someone could leave a woman to die in such merciless cold. He knelt beside her, brushing snow from her face, and saw fear locked behind her half-open eyes, mixed with exhaustion and quiet surrender. She did not scream or beg, as if she no longer had the strength to hope, and that silence struck him harder than any cry. The storm roared around them, urging him to retreat, but something deeper than instinct forced him to act. He wrapped her in his coat, lifting her carefully despite the biting wind, feeling how dangerously light her body was. And in that moment, he realized how close she was to death. Every step back toward the house felt like a battle against time, the snow resisting him, the wind howling as if testing his resolve. Inside, the warmth of the fire slowly returned color to her face, but the fear did not leave her eyes even as she drifted in and out of consciousness. She clutched the blanket tightly, trembling, as though expecting to be thrown back into the cold at any moment. The cowboy watched her in silence, questions filling his mind, but no answers coming. Only the heavy realization that this storm had delivered a truth he could not ignore. Whoever she was, whatever had brought her there, fate had placed her life in his hands, and the lonely path he had walked for years had just taken a turn he never saw coming. The fire crackled softly as the woman slowly regained strength, her eyes moving carefully around the unfamiliar room, every shadow making her tense as if danger still followed her. The cowboy kept his distance, offering quiet reassurance through actions rather than words, until her shaking finally eased enough for her to speak. Her voice was low and fragile, carrying an accent shaped by a life far from this frozen land, and each sentence felt heavy, as though telling the truth required more strength than surviving the storm. She explained that she had arrived in this country with hope, promised a new life through an arrangement she barely understood, believing marriage would bring safety and belonging. The man she was sent to lived nearby, the cowboy's own neighbor, someone who had signed papers but never planned to accept a real person with fears and dreams. When she reached his house, she was not welcomed, only judged, her presence treated like an inconvenience instead of a human commitment. Fear filled her eyes as she described how he refused her, accusing her of being a mistake he did not want, and how his words cut deeper than the cold ever could. She said he drove her away into the storm, leaving her with nowhere to go, knowing the blizzard was growing stronger with every passing minute. Her hands trembled as she admitted she had knocked on doors, called out for help, but the wind swallowed her voice and the snow erased her footprints. The cowboy listened in stunned silence, anger rising in his chest as the truth unfolded piece by piece, each detail revealing a cruelty he never expected from someone so close. She lowered her gaze, ashamed despite doing nothing wrong, explaining how the cold eventually stole her strength and how she collapsed near the mailbox because it was the last place she could reach before darkness took over. Tears slid down her face, not dramatic, but quiet and heavy, shaped by betrayal rather than pain, and the room felt smaller as her story filled it. The cowboy felt something shift inside him, a deep realization that wealth meant nothing if it allowed such heartless acts to exist nearby without consequence. He saw not a stranger, but a woman who had been treated like property, discarded when she failed to meet expectations she never created. The storm outside continued to rage, but inside the house a different storm settled, one made of anger, disbelief, and an unexpected need to protect. She waited for judgment, for rejection to repeat itself, her body tense as if prepared to be told to leave once more. Instead, the cowboy's voice remained steady as he told her she was safe, that no one would force her back into the cold again. In that moment, the truth did more than explain how she arrived at his door. It exposed the darkness of human cruelty and placed a silent promise between them, one that would change the course of both their lives forever. The room fell into a heavy quiet after his promise, but her fear did not fade. Instead, it settled deeper, shaping every movement she made as she sat wrapped in warmth yet unable to relax. She avoided his eyes, her hands gripping the fabric as though it were the only thing keeping her grounded, and when she spoke it was only a few careful words, chosen as if too much honesty might cost her safety. The cowboy noticed how she flinched at small sounds, how her shoulders tightened whenever he stood, and how she seemed ready to disappear if asked even the simplest question. Silence became her shield, built from betrayal and survival, and he understood that trust had been broken long before the storm found her. He watched her struggle between exhaustion and fear, realizing that saving her body had been the easy part, while her heart remained trapped in the moment she was cast aside. She slept lightly, waking often, her eyes opening wide as if expecting to be told to leave, and each time he reassured her without pressure, offering space rather than demands. Days passed slowly, marked by quiet meals and cautious glances, and though strength returned to her body, her voice stayed hidden behind guarded expressions. The cowboy began to see the depth of her trauma in the way she apologized for nothing, in how she hesitated before sitting, standing, or speaking, as if permission had once been denied too many times. He felt a growing weight inside him, not pity, but respect for a woman who had survived cruelty without becoming cruel herself. Watching her move through the house like a guest afraid to overstay, he realized how deeply she had believed in promises that were never meant to be kept. She had trusted strangers with her future, hoping for dignity and belonging, and that trust had almost taken her life. The knowledge angered him, but more than that, it sharpened his awareness of responsibility, because doing nothing would mean repeating the harm she already endured. He chose patience, understanding that fear does not leave simply because danger is gone, and that silence can speak louder than words. Slowly, she began to respond to his calm presence, meeting his gaze for brief moments, her posture softening when she realized no demand followed kindness. Still, The past clung to her, shaping every breath, and he knew healing would not arrive suddenly or easily. In the quiet hours, the cowboy reflected on how close she had come to vanishing without anyone noticing, and how chance had placed him between her and a silent ending. That realization changed him, filling the empty spaces of his life with purpose rather than loneliness. He saw that compassion was not loud or dramatic, but steady and patient, and that sometimes the bravest act was allowing someone the time to feel safe again. As the days that followed unfolded with quiet intention, the cowboy chose actions over explanations, creating a rhythm of safety that asked nothing from her except time. He prepared meals and left them on the table without watching, stepped aside to give her space, and spoke gently only when needed, making it clear through consistency that she was not a problem to solve, but a person to respect. She noticed how he never raised his voice, never questioned her worth, never reminded her of what she owed, and those small mercies began to loosen the tight fear wrapped around her chest. When she hesitated at the doorway, he waited. When she apologized without cause, he met her words with calm assurance. When she startled awake, he offered warmth without intrusion. Slowly, the house stopped feeling like a place she might be asked to leave and became somewhere her breath could finally slow. He ensured the locks were secure, the fire steady, and the pantry full, not as a display of power but as proof of care, and she absorbed that steadiness like light after darkness. With nourishment and rest, color returned to her cheeks, and with dignity restored, her posture changed, no longer folded inward as if expecting blame. She began to speak more, not in long stories, but in honest fragments, and he listened without correcting or interrupting, allowing her voice to exist without consequence. The respect surprised her most, because it arrived without condition, and for the first time since her journey began, she felt seen as human rather than an obligation. He never asked about repayment, never hinted at expectations, never treated kindness as leverage, and that absence of pressure rebuilt something fragile inside her. She started to help by choice, setting a cup down, folding a blanket, moving with growing confidence, and he accepted her efforts with gratitude instead of entitlement. In those moments, she realized she was no longer surviving minute by minute, but living hour by hour, and that difference mattered. The cowboy, in turn, felt his home transform, filled not with noise but with purpose, as if the walls themselves understood the change. He saw strength in her resilience and gentleness in her courage, and he protected both without making them feel small. When she smiled for the first time, tentative yet real, it carried more meaning than words, and he understood that safety is built through trust repeated daily. The world outside remained cold and uncertain, but inside the ranch, warmth grew from mutual respect rather than promises. She stopped feeling like a burden and began to feel like she belonged somewhere again, not because she was rescued, but because she was treated as equal. In that quiet exchange of care and patience, kindness revealed its true power, not loud or dramatic, but steady enough to change a life without asking for anything in return. Time moved gently through the ranch, measured not by clocks, but by shared silences and small moments that slowly stitched two wounded lives together. She began to wake without fear tightening her chest, greeting the mornings with cautious calm as sunlight replaced the memory of snow, and her steps grew steadier with each passing day. Strength returned to her body first, then to her voice, and finally to her spirit, which no longer hid behind constant apology. She laughed softly at simple things, surprised by the sound, as if rediscovering a forgotten part of herself, and that sound reached places inside the cowboy that had been untouched for years. He found himself listening for her footsteps, noticing how the house felt warmer even when the fire burned low, and the loneliness he once accepted as permanent began to loosen its grip. They spoke more freely now, sharing stories without pressure, learning each other's rhythms, understanding when words were needed and when quiet said enough. She trusted him in ways she never expected, asking questions, offering opinions, standing taller with each day that passed, and he respected that growth without trying to guide it. In her presence, he rediscovered patience not as endurance, but as care, realizing that opening his home had opened his heart as well. Evenings became moments of reflection rather than isolation, and the space between them filled with mutual understanding rather than distance. They worked side by side without roles or expectations, equal in effort and choice, and that balance made both feel whole in a way neither had known before. She noticed how his guarded nature softened, how his eyes carried warmth instead of emptiness, and how he smiled without forcing it. He noticed her resilience, the quiet courage that carried her forward despite everything she had lost, and he admired it without trying to claim it. Together they understood that survival had not been random, that the storm which nearly ended her life had also carved a path neither could have planned. Their bond did not rush toward labels or promises, because neither needed definition to feel real. It was built from trust earned slowly, from shared mornings and calm nights, from respect given freely. He no longer felt like a man waiting for life to pass him by, and she no longer felt like someone searching for a place to exist. In the stillness of the ranch, surrounded by land that once echoed with loneliness, both sensed a quiet truth forming, that some connections are born from loss but grow into purpose. What began as survival evolved into understanding, and understanding into something deeper, reminding them that healing does not arrive loudly but grows steadily when two souls choose patience over fear. The blizzard was long gone, leaving only the memory of freezing winds and relentless snow, but its impact remained etched in their hearts, a reminder of how fragile life could be and how unexpectedly it could change. The cowboy looked at her now, standing taller, eyes steady, a quiet strength radiating from her that had not existed before, and he understood that saving her had never been about heroism, but about recognizing humanity in its purest form. She no longer flinched at shadows or words, no longer expected betrayal at every turn. She carried herself with dignity and hope that had been stripped away by cruelty and cold. Together, they shared quiet mornings and soft evenings, the ranch alive not with wealth or possessions, but with trust, warmth, and understanding. That night of terror had forged a bond unbroken by fear or silence, and both knew that survival had led them to something far greater than either had imagined. A future built not on chance, but on courage, compassion, and the knowledge that even the harshest storms can bring the brightest beginnings.